is me starting my drawing of a hedgehog playing hopscotch. And I just started off with a gesture line, an action line. I knew I wanted to try and draw this hedgehog on his bottom 2 feet. And I know hedgehogs are kind of fat little ovalish creatures, so I imagined trying to bend one of those. You can see I'm just putting in a few guidelines and starting off just with a basic shape. For his foot, I didn't put in any little toes yet. I just kind of blocked in a little shape for his foot, kind of a little oblong, oval, or hexagon shape. I didn't entirely come up with this pose just from my imagination. I looked at several pictures of hedgehogs. I just Googled for pictures of hedgehogs so that I could see what their faces looked like, what their little quills looked like. I'm not sure if that's what you call hedgehog. Their quills, spines. I was looking to see kind of what they looked like, what the pattern around their face looked like, what they looked like stretched out, what they looked like bunched up. So I did do some image research before I began. Here you can see I'm adding in a zigzag line to show that there's this kind of spiny texture. And I just ended up doing that mostly just for the outside lines of this drawing. I thought about trying to draw every single little spike or spine on this hedgehog, and in the end, I felt that it would have been really hard to do and make it look good. I think it would have looked kind of messy. So I just stuck with a line for the outline of the drawing. Lots of erasing. Now I'm starting to block in the sidewalk where the hopscotch is going to be, and I did this on an angle, and I kind of had to play around with the angle a little bit before I felt that it was looking right. Here I'm putting in some guidelines for where the sidewalk can be, and I'm also using those to angle the hopscotch lines. And I was trying to remember that as things go back in space and get farther away, they get smaller. So I wanted to make sure that the angle lines were also doing that. They were getting narrower and closer together as they went farther away from us. Starting to add some more details. I really wasn't too sure how the feet or the little claws of a hedgehog should look. I looked at some pictures, and in art sometimes you got to look at the information you have and then do your best to kind of make it up. So I was doing just that. I kind of made a decision that I was going to do it a certain way for the feet and then just went with it. Starting to add some surrounding details, some background details to just show more about where my hedgehog is. So he's right next to a lawn. I added a flower bed that's a little bit out of frame, and then I thought a garden gnome might be a good little guy to keep him company. I turned my notepad, my sketchbook, to write the numbers just because I knew it would look better if I was looking at it right side up. So you can always turn your paper when you're drawing. Some action lines. And then here I'm starting my Sharpie. I showed you 2 Sharpie markers, but I really only ended up using the really thin one. The other one made lines that were just too thick. Here I'm adding in a few more details that I didn't draw in pencil just because there was an empty space in my little flower bed and I thought it needed something. It couldn't just be empty. So I just added in a few little flowers. The tulips and the flowers I just added, I actually took those from a childhood memory. So there's a little bit of, personal experience in my artwork. And my mom had tulips and little grape hyacinth flowers growing in her garden, and I remember them every spring from when I was a kid, so I put those in this little garden bed. I started my Sharpie. You maybe noticed I didn't start with the hedgehog. My reason for that, I never like to start with the most important thing of my drawing because as I get going with a new material, whether it's the pencil or the Sharpie especially because there's no erasing Sharpie, I just like to start with something less important in the drawing in case something's wrong with a marker, in case my hand is kind of shaky, in case anything goes wrong. At least if something goes wrong when I start off, it'll be on a part of the drawing that's less important. So generally, if I'm doing Sharpie or color, I start with things that are less important and finish with things that are more important. Just adding grass texture. I only did that texture along the edges of the lawn. I chose not to draw blades of grass for the whole thing. I thought it would have been too busy in the finished drawing. So now I'm done with my Sharpie and I'm going to erase all the extra pencil lines. This is really standard for the way that I like to draw, and I do this with you all too a lot. Pencil, Sharpie, and erase. So I'm just getting rid of all the extra pencil lines except for the Hopscotch board. I didn't want to outline the Hopscotch board in Sharpie, and you'll see why when I add color. I'm going to add color in a way that looks a little bit more like chalk, and a Sharpie line would have looked strange. So here I'm peeling a gold crayon, and I'm going to use it sideways and scrape and rub to create a sidewalk color. And I am using 3 different kinds, no, maybe 4 different kinds of color here. I have crayon, I have paint, marker, and then oil pastel. So because there's so many different kinds, I do like to work with all of my supplies kind of ready and right nearby so I don't have to go search for them. But sometimes I try and pick the right tool, all the time I guess, I try and pick the right tool for the job. So picking the right tool for the job, I like to have all of my materials kind of nearby and ready to go. So I had set out most of my supplies before I started doing color. And I picked paint to do the lawn because I thought paint was going to offer a better layer of color than like a marker would. Marker might be a little bit harder to get a smooth, even color for such a large area. So that's why I chose paint for this part. I'm adding some yellow. Wet on wet technique, just adding a little yellow on top of the green to brighten it up. So sometimes you can mix your paint before you put it on the paper, and in this instance, I was mixing it after I put it on the paper. And because the first layer is still wet, it blended together really nicely to create the final color. Here you can see I'm turning my paper. The watercolor paint needs a little time to dry, and if I tried to color in the hedgehog with marker, I might have problems with the paint and the marker bleeding, or the marker bleeding into the lawn color. So I am just moving to a different part of my art and working on that while the paint has some drying time. And you can't see in this video, but I was taking my marker colors and testing them on a scrap paper off to the side, just to make sure they were the color that I wanted before I started in. Anything you can't erase, I like to have a little scrap paper or a little planning paper to test it out first, just to make sure it's really what you want to use. And you can probably tell this video I sped this video up to share it with you, because it would have been, from start to finish, this drawing took me a little bit longer than an hour to do. So I think I probably spent about an hour and 15 minutes, including setting up my materials. And this final video is about 4 times as fast as I was working. So I sped it up just to share it with you without it taking a whole hour to share. So I really do take my time. And I could have spent less time on this, I could have spent more time on this, but in the end I thought I was pretty happy with how it turned out. Here I did crayon first, and now I'm layering some water-based marker over the crayon. The crayon's acting like a little bit of a resist, and it's just creating some texture in the flower bed that maybe resembles either dirt or mulch. And I thought that it might look nicer to have that variety with the crayon and then the marker. So I tried it out. Using some loopy lines. I did have to slow down and take my time in all those little bitty spaces. Right over the top of that crayon and around the flowers. All right, so now the paint on the lawn is dry enough where I felt safe adding my marker to my hedgehog. So I started off just outlining the areas that I was going to do brown and laying down that color. And again, I wasn't sure if I was going to go back and add some little spiny marks inside of the brown area, and I decided not to. I didn't want to make it too busy. I didn't want it to look messy. I thought the edge that was a zigzag did a good enough job showing texture. And as I continue coloring, you're going to see that I use some mark making with my marker to try and create that spiny texture. So I'm doing little rows of kind of little spiny marks, and I thought that that texture also helped it look more like a hedgehog. Something to remember when I draw, I always try and think the direction of my lines does matter in the final drawing. finishing up that little gnome, gave him some styling gnome clothes. And now I took out my oil pastels because I think they look the most like chalk, unless I really was going to use chalk. But oil pastels are a little bit nicer than chalk would be in this case because they won't smear off the page. So I just picked a couple oil pastel colors that look like some of the sidewalk chalk we have here at our house. And there you have it, a hedgehog playing hopscotch. Thanks for watching, guys.